Hi everyone, welcome again. Remember me, I'm Monet Bean and I am a professional development facilitator here in Spring ISD in the Workforce Development Department. I am bringing you this video as promised because some of us we got to the end of the course, but I really wanted to spend some time going through the examples a little bit more and just provide you with a little bit of time to go through and peruse through each document, pause, rewind, especially since we had such a large crowd and we had a few technology issues with getting a few of you to access your camera, your microphone, and such like that. So here I am. If you need anything, you have my email. It's MBEENE, the first letter of my first name and my last name at Spring ISD. And you just know that I'm here to support you in any way that you need. You can also tweet me if you have any questions or anything insightful as well. Lastly, I also wanted to share with you all that this is only going to go over implementing and exploring. I will not talk about how to actually set up or create a workstation activity. I just want to talk to you and give you the frame of mind to think, yes, it is possible in the virtual setting. We know how to implement workstations in class, so now let's have a paradigm shift and think about, okay, how can I take the best practices that I'm already implementing in my classroom and implement that in my virtual classroom? So stick with me. I look forward to learning with you today. Just going over this again, we know all the work that we do is to ensure that we are meeting the goals of the district, which is reaching every scholar through intentional and purposeful instruction, through excellence in every school, and through increased engagement. And of course, ensuring that there are high expectations from every employee. And I shared with you that you joining this session today, or well, when you joined it on Tuesday, shows your commitment to doing all of those. So you are doing your part by being active in this session, and even more so now being active in going back to review the session. I also shared with you that we would touch on domains 1, 2, and 3, planning, so how to effectively plan for the implementation of workstations, how workstations truly impact your instruction, and in order for you to effectively implement workstations, you have to build a learning environment, a classroom culture that is conducive and accepting of workstations. Shared with you our norms. So just remember, as you go through the virtual sessions, aim to be there 5 minutes early. Mute your microphone, ladies and gentlemen. And if you have any questions, post them in the chat and wait for someone to prompt you to unmute. And it's always great to light your face, not your back, which is why you see my curtain behind me, because my desk is set up in front of it. And so I want to light my face and not my back. In the session, you will develop an understanding of best practices for the implementation of your digital workstations, as well as discuss or listen to, we did discuss in the chat, components of what makes a workstation effective and what are some things that I can do to support my design and facilitation of those effective workstations, effective activities, effective lessons. It is so important, effective, and a best practice to present to your scholars the workstations they will visit over the class period, over the week, over a few days, or over the unit ahead of time before you release them to work time. Not only does this assist with your intentional planning, it also outlines expectations to your scholars and allows you the opportunity to go through each workstation with your scholars so that they have, even if it is surface level, a clear surface level understanding of what you are expecting them to do when they arrive to each workstation. On the screen are the workstations that you have experienced, because remember, I'm recording this for you all. These are the workstations that you are going to learn today. They're in your packet. Again, I will share with you the best practices on number of stations later in the session, but just know there's a great deal of material that I wanted to share, and I wanted to be able to allow opportunity for you to see it in action as opposed to just hearing it. So you'll see on your screen, in your participant packet, you have 5 sections. And so there's a section for breakout into the team contract. There's a section for breakout into the jigsaw. There's a section for the breakout into small group instruction breakdown, a breakout for roles and instruction, as well as a breakout for flexible groups. And it's also best practice to not only give them what the title, a creative title of what the workstation is, but as you see on the screen, a learning goal. So when they get to that station, what is the expectation for them when they are there? What are they expected to learn? How are they expected to apply the content beyond just the station? So if you're ready, we're going to get started. I, again, am sharing with you a document. It's your participant guide. This is your virtual packet or virtual resource guide. If you were in my session, you would, of course, in the physical sense, have a copy of this, but we're not, so you have a copy of this. This can be your notes page. This can be something for you to reference later on. So you see on your screen now a sample of how you might display for your scholars where their breakout rooms will be for the session. So I just wanted to share with you that you see an example of what the breakout room would be. When you reference breakout teams, you are basically naming the groups or the rooms the scholars will report to when it's time for the workout session. We know when they are in a physical class, we group them, and this is the group that they stay with, and then they rotate through the workstations with these groups. However, if you didn't know, but you know because you went to my session, right? Workstations look different in the virtual or digital setting because we know our kids can't rotate, right? They can't rotate screens, of course, right? So what we will do is rotate the work, and so you'll see some examples of that later. You see the group assignments. You want to tell your scholars to feel free to take a picture of the slide, or you might also have it posted somewhere else. You will also have it if you have a document for them to work in. You also see this like I gave it to you in your participant guide as well. And so I reminded you that you want to remind and tell your scholars that you need them to be responsible. You want them to be responsible in knowing what group they are in and knowing the group number. In our session, we had a lot of people, so I honed in on the idea to highlight, put it on a sticky note, all of that, and then when the scholars do go to their breakout rooms, their workstation rooms, you as the teacher and or co-teachers, you go in and you monitor that list. You check off that list to make sure that they went to the correct room, or you can look in the side pane and see what room every scholar is going to. And so again, while I am explaining and did specifically explain this to you, I did that as a way to model what or how you might want to specifically explain or outline to your scholars, as well as how to identify their name and the importance of being responsible in the digital world. So if you could take away anything from this slide, that is to think about your procedures. You first think about them. And think about how you're going to explain them to your scholars, and then explain your procedures and expectations to them, and then allow them time to practice before you dismiss them into the work environment. So, looking at the participant guide, you also see team contracts and team folders underneath the assignments. For example, if you saw your name under breakout room 1, you would go to breakout room 1 under that resources to get all of the tasks, all of the assignments that you needed for the day. If you needed it in breakout 2, you would look in room breakout 2. So, of course, if you were in the session, at this point, we were going to do a breakout to practice our team contracts. The purpose of doing that is to first practice a breakout and then to practice giving them something to do when they are in the breakout. The purpose of the team contract is to ensure that not only your scholars know that they have an individual role as a student to get the work done, but they also have roles as team members to work together and to hold each other accountable. Now, in elementary grades, for example, depending on the grade level of your scholars and their functionality capacity, you might want to go ahead and assign them team roles. You may even have to spend some time building background knowledge over what each role is and what each role means, like a vocabulary study, which is perfectly okay because they're still learning. Again, you may even have to help them identify and select which role they want to be. And like I mentioned, this could be a lesson in itself. And so what I would suggest is to tie it to your SEL competencies, your social emotional learning. We will go through it So you can live in a learn and go. We did go through it, and I want you to take some time to pause if you need to go through the contract and see, okay, how could I possibly accommodate and change, modify this to meet the level of my scholars. So at this time, feel free to pause. Feel free to think about how you want to organize your breakout rooms based on the number of scholars that you have in your individual classes. Feel free to look at how you might implement or modify the use your words, modify the contract to meet the needs of your scholars. When you are done, feel free to resume the video and continue in the learning. I will see you in a bit. So right here was an example. We remember this. Some of us were frustrated with Monet, right? Because I didn't give you enough time to work on the puzzle. And if you want to work on it, I will still link it. But this was just an example to get your mind moving on what small group instruction is and to begin introducing workstations, because you really can't have workstations without small groups, and can't have small groups without workstations, because you want to have something for your scholars to do while you are pulling those small groups. So that's the puzzle activity. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. If you want to do the puzzle, feel free to do the puzzle, but I'm going to reveal the definition again to you on the next slide. And again, so small group instruction, I have the definition, is generally focused on teaching scholars a specific content or concept. So in your small group instruction, you're focused on reading and you're focusing on plot development, but it's based on a common need. So you're pulling scholars based on a need that you want to focus in on to target towards mastery. So small group instruction is one of a teacher's key levers for supporting scholars, right? Teachers often utilize this time to review scholar data, to set goals, and to even support their struggling scholars. Teachers prepare for small group instruction through, again, reviewing scholar data and setting goals. In this session, teachers support those struggling scholars. They teach or reteach or remediate instruction. Selection of scholars is particularly, again, using data points to provide target supports based on scholar need. As a small group is being pulled or left in the main room, workstations are happening, which are the other groups that too focus on specific concepts. It is just student-led and student-driven. So you might choose to have small groups today. You might just choose to have all your scholars in workstations and you pop in. However, you please understand that you have the opportunity to pop in and see everybody, okay? It's not you're releasing them and you don't have any control over what is taking place in those groups. So this was an opportunity to break out again into a breakout room, and feel free to look at the document, write on the document. This was just an idea to better unpack and focus on the differences of workstations, how they operate, the differences between workstations and small group. So this was, again, an opportunity for you to break out and have discourse on it and then fill out the shared document. Then you would have you did come back, and we talked about it. So small group instruction is one of the teacher's key levers, right? You're using data, you are pulling scholars intentionally based on what they need. So at the beginning of year, this is the time where you really want to spend pulling your data from Eduphoria to see where your scholars truly are, because your small groups and your workstations, are built on knowing your scholars, knowing their learning behaviors, knowing their data trends, right? But right now we really don't know our babies like we desire to be, and like we desire to know. Slow down, I told y'all in the session I get excited. Like we desire to know and like we will. So in short, we know small group instruction is something that's teacher-led, right? And you pull priority scholars driven by the data that shows, okay, this cluster of scholars they need support with this. Again, it's teacher-led and it's teacher-organized, and it consists of no less than 2, no more than 6 scholars. You have already you've already prepared the material for them that you need, because it's intentional, it's purposefully planned. And again, if I haven't said it enough, it's driven by data to support where they are struggling. And generally, you don't want to do more than 1 to 2 rotations, meaning pull one small group or no more than 2 small groups in a session. Now, your workstations, which is what this session is heavily based on, is with your scholars, and it's really scholar student led. They are working in areas that they have been assigned to or grouped accordingly to explore various aspects of the learning that they struggled with or just need that extra push. And so this takes place while priority scholars are in your teacher led small group. And then when you're in workstations, your purposefully planned workstations, you have them set for certain amounts of time. You just don't say, okay, 40 minutes, go. But you might chunk the opportunities for them to learn. It is also important to note that this can take place over a span of days. You do not have to do all your workstations in one day. You can allot 30 minutes a class period twice a week for workstations, whatever the case may be. And then I must say that you should not teach new material in your workstations, because workstations are meant to uplift, to build, to strengthen our scholars, and we don't want them to feel defeated once they leave those workstations. So, why workstations, ladies and gentlemen? And so this was the moment where we reflected on the role that workstations could play in our virtual classrooms. We already know that workstations are beneficial in the class, but we want to think about, okay, how can we transfer those same best practices that we do in the real world to the virtual world, which is still the real world. It's just over a computer screen. And so we just talked about really meeting the needs of our scholars. We talked about being able to close instructional gaps. We talked about being able to still have those face-to-face communication, that conversation with our scholars. I'm sorry, guys. You have to respect the public, the personal space, right? You have to respect that we are all at home and things happen. Children might run across the screen and dogs might bark. And so that's what's transpiring right now. And I do apologize. And so just workstations really allow you to be able to converse and have discourse and dialogue with your scholars on what they're struggling and walk them through it, as opposed to just recording a video and allowing them to struggle on their own. So then we did do another breakout where we talked about the roles in instruction, and you need to establish roles. So what this means is, while the scholars are working, the teacher has a role. And while the teacher is doing what the teacher is doing, the scholars have roles. And so feel free to look at that document, because the next slide I'm going to share with you those roles. So the teacher should use this as a time to do individual and group check-ins with scholars on individual skills or problems, questions of the current task. So the teacher can pop into the breakout rooms, or the teacher can say, hey, Monet, join me in the main room. I just want to just check to see if you're understanding. You can just say, join me in the main room, right? And then when they join you in the main room, you can ask questions, you can push their thinking, you can challenge them, and then send them back to their breakout room, right? So you're holding conferences with scholars, you're facilitating by walking around, right? Walking around by popping into each breakout room, and you're also pushing and challenging their thinking. Again, this is a great time to just push them as you're moving to close gaps, and you're working to ensure that we're moving scholars toward mastery before we move on to the next skill or the next concept or the next lesson. You should be visible. So just as you are visible in the classroom, you want to be visible in those breakout rooms to ensure that you are watching scholars or listening in on scholars for behavioral or academic issues, just as you would check in frequently with them in the academic classroom setting. Likewise, the scholar has roles too. They should be actively engaged in the task. They know that Miss Bean, that's my last name, expects them to be on task and in the learning when they are in their workstations. They should be actively engaged in the task. If they are off task, that signifies that maybe the task is too difficult that you're asking them to do, maybe it's too easy, or maybe it's not relevant to the class. And so while assignments should be rigorous, they should also lend themselves for scholars to be able to complete it in an engaging manner. So it should be engaging enough for them to complete it. Your expectation for them also includes the use of academic language, and you need to think about ways, or you should consider ways in which you can hold your scholars accountable for using academic language, academic conversations while they are in their small groups and workstations. The assignment should also allow your scholars to think deeply and to apply, question, or create something to show their mastery. So application and synthesis of information. You also want to allow opportunities for them to inquire and to question what is forthcoming and or just question the process. So a recap of what has been shared thus far. The goal of reorganizing a classroom around workstations is to allow you, the teacher, to provide the highest quality of instruction to scholars in smaller quantities through conferences and through check-ins while other groups of scholars are working productively. So even if all 30 of your scholars are involved in workstations and you don't pull small groups, you are meeting the needs of them in smaller quantities, and you can provide conferences with group 1 by themselves, with group 3 by themselves, and do frequent check-ins with all of your scholars. You can help to ensure that they are working productively, that they are working independently, and that they are working cooperatively, but not only in one task, but through a variety of tasks that are interconnected at their groups, at their stations, at their centers. Small groups and workstations are purposefully designed, guys, to aid in closing gaps and heightening achievement. Again, small groups are teacher-led, workstations are student-scholar facilitated. Through your systems and routines, scholars have opportunities to collaborate, to strengthen their content and skill knowledge while you are swooping in to push and provide the reinforcement. Remember, workstations are all about the discovery of their deficits and providing opportunities to practice mastery with their peers as a second approach. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very transparent and try to bring life into my professional developments. And while I could have edited my baby barking out, I felt the need to just leave it in for a little razzle dazzle. I have to share now he is over there in his little teepee, which is in my office, so I can keep a close eye on him. And now he is asleep. I'm like, sir, you could have did that previously, but whatever. So on to virtual implementation. So we've talked a little bit about workstations just to build capacity and to allow us to all to have a clear, I hope, understanding. So now let's look closer at how to make this happen in a virtual instructional setting. So at this point, I want you to think about what all do you know about flexible grouping, and just feel free to pause your screen if you want to think about it. And then when you're ready to join in the learning, resume and move forward to the next couple of seconds. So you pause possibly. We know in order to effectively roll out workstations, we have to think about purposeful grouping, right? So think about what are some ways that we can or that you have grouped your scholars in your classroom. Once you've taken a moment to reflect and think on that, press play and resume in the learning. So we often gravitate or use homogeneous grouping as it benefits scholars and makes our job of grouping so much easier, right? Or just slightly. So all the scholars who struggle with fractions are in this group. All the scholars who love word problems are in this group. It's just easier, right? But with the multiple skills, this is not the way. Knowing what the scholars in each group need and teaching on their level reduces the risk of boring a scholar with higher level abilities or overlooking a scholar who struggles. During workstation and centers time, when you are not directly involved in the scholar's learning, you can form heterogeneous groups, that is, groups of scholars with varying abilities. Depending on the task, you can call them cooperative learning groups. The heterogeneous grouping allows scholars to interact with those they do not see in small groups and can increase understanding and learning. Scholars support each other's learnings. You all know that, right? While more advanced scholars can serve as models for their peers and help them understand the vocabulary by explaining the concept. They can also help them to understand the learning objective. They are increasing their vocabulary because they are pushing other scholars to kind of meet up to their level or just to grow and glow more. These groups at workstations are formed in order for children to examine specific questions, such as an experiment to see what objects float and which objects will sink, for example. With a specific focus, the workstation activity keeps scholars on task, so purposeful. Remember, at the beginning, I shared the focus or goal of each workstation, right? It was defined through my purposeful planning. Through their investigations, their conversations, scholars can and will learn from each other. So, how to create flexible groups for workstations. Depending on the focus of the activities and the lesson objective, excuse me, scholars may be grouped based on similar learning profiles. They may be grouped based on their heterogeneous mixtures or a random assignment. And random assignment it's good sometimes. I want you to just take a few moments to think about, and feel free to pause the screen and then press play when you're ready to resume in the learning. What is a strength and a challenge of implementing both? Now, again, as I mentioned to you on Tuesday, just because it is a challenge does not mean you should avoid implementing it in your classroom. That just means you need to fine tune and think through the process to ensure that when you apply it, you have the least amount of challenges as possible. So, pause your screen, and then when you're ready to return, press play and come on back and join me in the learning. I will see you in a bit. On your screen are some supports to consider when creating workstations. Think about your data and the instructional needs. This is what drives your workstation. So when you are planning your workstations, you really want to think about what are some areas that my scholars need more support or need to be enriched in. From there, you will create short, effective tasks that will support and allow scholars opportunities to grow. You will use test data, exit tickets, do nows, or any other data to drive the creation of the activity. You will think about how much time you have and how long each opportunity for scholars to work should be. When I do workstations, especially when they are rotating, I try to keep a standard time. It helps with the rotation schedule and ensuring that I'm keeping everybody on track. In the virtual world, remember, they do not rotate physically. They will rotate the work that is being done or the assignments. They will differ in each group possibly. And so you want to differ how you group your scholars. You want to group scholars with individuals that they do not normally work with, but you also want to be cognizant of ensuring that scholars will work well with one another and will not get too distracted or get distracted when they are in their breakout, or workstation group. You also want to display groups clearly. At the beginning of the session, I shared with you your workstation group assignments and the task for each session, or maybe for the next couple of days, or maybe for the next week if you were teaching. Whatever the case may be, you want to, in class, ensure it is posted visibly, right? Same thing in the virtual world. You want to ensure that it is easily accessible. So post it and then share it somewhere where they can reference it again and again if they lose it or forget it, or if they misplace their sticky note or something. It is great to organize folders of all materials for your scholars. This works even for young scholars as well. You just have to be sure to model first and walk them through every process and procedure. Know that kids know how to use technology. It is sometimes us as adults who struggle, who do not understand how to do something, and so we feel that our scholars might. So just because we have a learning curve, I think it's important for me to share that you should not underestimate the power of your learners. You should connect activities again with tasks and with objectives. Again, be purposeful. Workstations should not be random, but purposeful and tied to closing gaps, not busy work. You want to always ensure that you are assigning tasks that are associated with the previous learning, not something new. Again, we want to build and ensure growth and academic successes. You also want to, as I mentioned, display clear, concise directions. You want to set your scholars up for success, so be clear in your directions and expectations. You have seen examples of this in my delivery today and in my task assignments. You want to give no more than 4, no less than 2 workstations at a time. You do not want to overwhelm your scholars with the number of stations or overwhelm yourself with having to create a large number of stations. Again, 2 to 4. For example, you can have 8 groups, but only 4 stations. And so group 1 and group 5 are doing the same thing, group 2 and group 6 are doing the same thing, and so forth. I don't want to mess up with my counting. That way, again, you're not having to create 8 activities. So at this time, I'm going to pause to allow you time to internalize, and then if you're ready, go ahead and press play. If you need to pause, and then come back into the learning. So let us get specific in platform use and structure by way of Schoology. You might not be able to see that clearly, but the big blue button is a third-party affiliate that allows you to do all the curriculum wonders that you may like about Zoom. When thinking about grouping and workstations in a teaching or instructional setting that is synchronous, the conference and breakout room function is imperative. I sent you the information of how to join a live conference. You will also follow those same steps to get here to creating your own breakout room for your scholars. Then you will create new conference. I usually just set it up and leave it there until I'm ready to use it. If you started ahead of time, once you close out of it, it will no longer be active and will be found under the archived under the completed tab. So do not do that. You can assign a start time and an end time. So be sure to let your class session. Be sure to know your class session time and let them know. Maybe extend it a few minutes earlier and later, just in case you have scholars that arrive early or scholars that want to stay after a little longer to ask questions after the event. You can press, however, the start button before time. Again, just do not close it until class is over or it will archive and mark it as completed. Once you are in, you will see the screen that I mentioned previously. Once you are you see the screen again that I mentioned previously. In the left-hand corner, in the left pane, you see the gear next to users. When you press that as the teacher admin, that allows you a few options. The one I want to draw your attention to is create breakout room options. This is how we create and manage our workstations or our breakout rooms for scholars to work in. The screen will then look like this, and you will start with selecting the number of rooms you want. You can select anywhere between 2 to 8 breakout rooms or 2 to 8 workstations. All the students will be listed. If I have more scholars besides myself for the sake of the demo, you will see their names randomly dispersed throughout. After choosing the number of groups, you will select the duration of time you want them to work in this station. Then you will assign groups. I will go over this more in the forthcoming slides, but when you are on this screen, you basically just drag and drop names in the groups you want scholars to be in if you haven't previously established which groups you want them to join. This can be a bit time consuming, so I will give you a few hacks or pointers as a way to keep you organized and orderly and not waste instructional time, right? We're not wasting instructional time. I remember my assistant principal, my second year teaching said, we do not give instructional discounts. And so I take that with me to this day. Then you press create and it will prompt scholars to enter the room. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. I had to join in on another window to put myself in the other group as well because it would not allow me to create an empty breakout. So now you see that I have myself twice. I had to add on a different window and then do what I needed to do to move myself. So the one that says not assigned, I'm going to drag myself into room 2 and then I'll have my 2 breakout groups. Once you select create, all of your scholars' screen will be prompted like this if you selected to allow them to select their own room. Okay? Once you select create, all your scholars will be prompted with a message displayed on their screen. Again, if you assign them randomly, the one at the top is going to appear. So you assign them randomly and they just join whichever room that you said that random selection took place. If they are selecting their own room from how you assign them as I did, showing them a list that I already had you grouped as, they will select from the bottom. And so many of you may have struggled with this because you may did not select the drop down, you just selected join. But see how it says sample session room 1? It's going to say how, so if you have 6 rooms, it'll say room 1, it'll say sample live session room 1, sample live session room 2, sample live session room 3, sample live, all the way to 6, right? And so you want your scholars to realize it. Don't just select the first one. They need to look for the number that corresponds with what you assign them. And then they'll select join, and then they'll be prompted to join the room. So a couple of need to knows. You need to be intentional because you cannot extend the time when they are in the breakout rooms if they need more time. You will have to let the time expire, bring them back, and then send them back. So purposefully plan to ensure you have assigned the correct amount of time the first time around. Again, you have to send them back, bring them back, and then send them back. However, if they seem to be finishing earlier, you can end the rooms earlier if needed. You cannot predetermine team members ahead of time for breakout rooms, like I mentioned. So it's helpful to have that list displayed on a separate slide or in their Google Docs, use your words, in a Google Drive folder or on a Google Doc is what I was trying to say. Both of them, Google Docs folder, Google Docs, Google Drive. Anyways, it's important to have it displayed somewhere separate. Let them know where it is displayed and then let them reference it later. Again, you can also have it somewhere in your course materials as well in a shareable doc. Let's see here. It is also helpful for you to, I lost my train of thought. The participants will then have to report to their groups on their own as they work in a physical class setting. That is not what I wanted to say. You also, another important need to know is just the idea of collaboration and accountability, okay? So when you go to the breakout room, the room is just a holding space. It isn't somewhere where you go and then the activity is assigned to them there. Just like if you were in the class, you would have a folder on the middle of the table. You can't directly assign in the breakout room. And so like I mentioned, having a shareable doc or a folder, you have to be organized and you have to have the tasks that you want them to complete already in folders and teach and model for scholars how to access that ahead of time. So when they do get to that room and get to that portion of the workstation or that rotation, they understand what is expected of them. Another way to implement virtual classrooms is through everyone's favorite. It's the new craze that's sweeping the nation, right? For all educators. I'm so funny. It's Bitmoji Virtual Classroom. So you can use Bitmoji Virtual Classroom to implement, you got to keep yourself going, right? To implement workstations. This takes a little time, patience, and creativity. And my goal is to not go into great detail on the actual setup. There are websites, there are YouTube videos, there are Facebook groups on that can help you with this. I am going to, and you have access to by now, examples of Bitmoji links to set up your classroom. But what I am going to go over is what workstations will look like once you have your virtual classroom set up. So here's an example of what workstations could look like using a virtual classroom, using your Bitmoji. Other examples might include cubbies, bins, baskets where scholars can choose what they want to work on. You can link the work or video to whatever the task may be by selecting that image in your Bitmoji classroom and then linking it to something that you want them to do. So for example, if you look over to the right, you see the board, and then look to the left, or is that the left? I think this is the left of your screen. Look to the left where you see workstation 1, 2, and 3. And so that blue kidney table is workstation 1. And if they click on the books in the center, they'll see reading comprehension questions that you might go over or that they can go over together. In the center where you see the Dr. Seuss books is plot analysis. And so you might click on that and it's a read aloud, or you might click on that and there is a diagram for them to analyze plot together as a group. The third table, you see a stack of folders. And so in those folders are different pieces of papers and prompts that they can use to build a personal narrative by brainstorming and drafting. And so you have the classroom set up just as you would your classroom. You have the classroom set up just as you would your classroom doing workstations, and then you hyperlink those pictures or whatever to activities to complete in the workstation. So some need to knows for Bitmoji virtual classrooms and workstations. They have to be made or can be made in PowerPoint and or Google Slide. You can attach links to images to make them active tasks. So you can't just put pictures on there and expect for works and miracles to take place, right? You have to link them. You can also link videos like I mentioned. So if you want to do a read aloud or if you want to record a video of yourself, you can link that to an image or something. Like I mentioned before, assignments still must be created and housed separately in a folder or in documents for them to create. Again, magic just won't appear in the classroom. And then in order for your scholars, in order for your babies, your kids to be able to do the work, you have to publish the Google Slide presentation or the PowerPoint presentation for it to be active, for them to be able to click on it and work on those links, on those pictures, on those documents. So when thinking about organizing your groups, here are some examples. So you have 6 groups, for example. You have 6 groups with 4 kids in each group. Perfect world, right? And this workstation is no rotations are involved. It's just frequent interaction. So you release your scholars to workstations and then you're popping in and you're checking on them. And then after 10 minutes, you might call them back to the main room and just check in and see what's going on. What are some misconceptions that they have? What are some problems, some challenges that are arising? You might celebrate some successes and then release them back to finish the work, and you might pull them back again to check on them whole group. So that is one example of what you might do when you have them just released and you don't have any rotations. You just call them back often for checks, for understandings, for answering and asking of common questions. Example 2, however, might mimic what a workstation might look like in your classroom when you have scholars rotating. Now remember, I shared with you scholars cannot rotate across screens, right? So what you do is you rotate the work by assigning time limits. So in this workstation, I only have 3 groups, but I only have 3 rotations, but I have 6 groups. So I have 24 kids, right? And they're grouped in the various 6 groups. In group 1 and group 4 are doing the same thing at the same time. 2 and 5 are doing the same thing. 3 and 6. So in this example right here, I am doing 3 12-minute time rotations or transitions. And so for the first 12 minutes, my scholars in group 1 and 4 are working on vocab. While they are working on vocab, my scholars in group 3 and 6, they're working on an open-ended response question based on a passage that they read last class period, and then 2 and 5 are working on plot analysis. After the 12 minutes is up, I might bring them back to the main room for a 1-minute brain break, a stretch, whatever, and then I'll release them back to work on station 2 for 12 more minutes, and so forth and so on. So this is the example, this is the ideal example of how you do rotations, but in a virtual setting. Again, kids are not running down the street, across the street, around Houston to go to their friends' homes, right? But they are rotating, they're rotating the work as opposed to rotating their bodies. So now let's explore some examples of work implemented in actual virtual workstations. So virtual workstations could look like the following: card sorts with written or oral justification, assignments paired with a website, vocabulary development, text analysis and the application of that text. You can have them to do some discovery and scavenger learning. You can always have them write and do writing development in workstations, as well as opportunities to engage your kinesthetic learners, your visual learners, as well as creative learning, creative products that can be used to extend the learning process. The possibilities are endless, guys, truly endless. So let's take a look. Example of a science activity, but it could definitely be any subject, right? I just took an image, right, and I clipped it. And so you can create boxes, like just a graph, and clip it, and then have your scholars to drag and drop or copy and paste what they think is a solid, a liquid, and or a gas. And You might have them initial their name or initial all the people who believed that wind was a solid and smoke was a liquid. So whenever I'm pulling you into small group, or when I'm conferring with your group as I'm popping into all my groups, I can say, okay, Monet, tell me your thinking behind why you thought smoke was a liquid, and I can begin to start closing those gaps right there. Another example here on the left is the use of copy and pasting pictures to show what each aspect might look like. With older grades, you might take away the explanations and have them to explain while they are in groups what's happening. So you just might have divergent, convergent, and transform, and have them copy and paste or find pictures of divergent, convergent, and transform. And then they need to talk about, okay, I know divergent is when two plates separate. And so then they'll find another picture, or they might, give some examples. And so that's how you do that for older grades as well as your younger grades. The image on the right is describing landforms. And so in each breakout group, you might assign each breakout group a landform, and then your scholars have to describe the landform to someone that they've never seen before, or describe a part of the world where the landform can be found, but you'll have them describe it in a poem, in a rap, in a song, in a script, whatever the case may be. So again, guys, possibilities are endless. On the left, this is what I was talking about, pairing it with a website. You can just post a link to a website that has dice for kids and have them to roll the dice in their groups and then fill out the boxes. And then it says if your difference is less than whatever you are, you get 5 points. If it's more than whatever, you don't earn any points. And so it's an opportunity to practice learning, to have manipulatives in the virtual setting, and then have a little fun. On the right, notice how I'm not giving them all 10 problems to answer. They only have 5. They're to complete the 5 that are highlighted, and then once they've solved the problem, right? So 2 times 6 is 12. They have to create a word problem or a number sentence for each problem. So you're extending the learning, you're incorporating writing, you're having them to do more than just solving something that's going to take a hot second to complete. On the left side of your screen, you notice big problems with the Articles of Confederation. There's words on the left side that share with you in that left-hand column what a few problems could be, and then you might have your scholars in their breakout sessions type in, paste in what would happen as a result of that, what will happen, or they might even paste in pictures or links to videos that support the national government has no power to make taxes, for example. So what will happen as a result of that? On the right-hand side, you might have them to retell major events using photos from Google search, as it says. So retell the 4 major events from the Articles of Confederation. And they would paste in 4 different photos, and then at the bottom they would type a sentence or a couple of sentences explaining the picture that they chose and why that picture is so important. And then lastly, you might give your scholars an article or a piece of text to read, and they have to analyze and or break down the text that you have assigned them. So in the example on the left, in the furthest back, you see the scholarship jacket is hyperlinked. So scholars in their breakout groups can read the passage together, or the article or the text, the excerpt, the selection, whatever the case may be. They can read that together, and then they, of course, this is an ELA example, will analyze each character and write out their character trait. So one person might be assigned Joanne, another person might be assigned Martha, and another group member might be assigned Grandma and Grandpa. And they have to figure out what is the character trait, provide text evidence to support why they named that person that character trait or assign that person that character trait, and then give justification, some form of reasoning or further explication as to why they wrote what they wrote. You could also have one group member write all the character traits, one group member write all the text evidence, one group member provide all the justification, or however you might choose for them to complete the task, or however they might choose to complete the task. And then on the far right, kind of like in the mix of where I'm speaking, you have a Freyer model, a graphic organizer. Any content, any course, any class can do a vocabulary development in a breakout or a workstation. So these are just a couple of examples to consider. Y'all, really and truly, in short, boxes are your friends, graphs are your friends, okay, tables are your friends. So create a table, make it a shareable doc, and have them to manipulate and write within those documents. Thank you all. It's been my pleasure to be able to provide this video for you. Feel free to stop, pause, rewind, fast forward, and reference it as much as you need to. I look forward to seeing you all again in the future, whether it's in the virtual setting or face-to-face at another session. Have a great one, and of course, if you need anything, do not hesitate to email me and reach out to me or tweet me. Bye.